Hello and welcome to another edition of Sun Dragon Tips and Tricks. I'm Rebecca. I'm the owner of Sun Dragon Art and Fiber in downtown Brevard, North Carolina. And Monday, coming to you from my house, I'm going to continue with our pressed flowers make along helpful videos. So our spring make along at Sun Dragon for anyone wherever you are is to try one of the pressed flowers patterns by Amy Christoffers. And she has a hat, she has a cowl, she has a cardigan, and she has a shawl. And I'm most of the way through the shawl. I have just started my cardigan. I finished my hat, it's at the shop, and this is the cowl that I'm working on. So last week's video was on the plain stitch, it was just on getting you used to garter mosaic, the basics of garter mosaic. Today, we're going to get into a little bit of what makes these flowers unique and how you can do the mosaic when it's not just one then the other stitch like plain stitch, something a little more complicated like this. And I have replicated just a little fraction, not the whole pattern, just a little bit of 2 rows on my whiteboards to show you some of the techniques you'll need diving in or to help you process those charts that are in the pattern. I am not replicating the whole pattern here. It's very important that you get the pattern from Amy Christoffers on Ravelry. She may have another way to get it too, but I usually get my patterns through Ravelry. I'll put the links in the description of this video. She put a lot of work into this. I am not trying to replicate her work here without her getting credit or paid for it. So it's just a few tips to help you when you're working the pattern, when you're working these charts. The charts come up in every single one of her 4 patterns. And there's a little bit, if you've never done charts before, I have a whole nother video on charts, but this will give you some of the basics for her specific charts and how they're written. The most important thing with any chart is follow the key. Follow the instructions in the chart, which are where some of the numbers are, which we're about to go over, and look at the author's key because different pattern writers are going to use different symbols potentially in their charts. If it's a good pattern, they should have given you a key. So last video went over the slipping and knitting of mosaic and how we have 2 rows. We'll review some of that. This has the slipping and knitting when it's not just a 1 by 1, when there's something else going on. So let's get to it. So part of what I really like about Amy Christoffers' pressed flowers mosaic pattern is we have garter mosaic, which is knitting on each side when you're working flat. And this is for the flat stuff. The hat is done in the round, that's different. And the sleeves and the cardigan are done in the round. I will get to those if I can. But for knitting flat, which the cowl is done, here's the back and here's the front. And the garter bumpy where you're knitting on both sides is this stuff down here. Now the flowers look pressed because they are not in garter, they're in stockinette, which is the fancy term for purling on the back side. Only where the contrast color is are you purling though. So let's see what that looks like in the charts. The charts give you the instructions to understand that. All right, let's take a look at a little bit of a chart, especially with mosaic. We'll go over some basics of charts and how to read this one, and then we'll do it. So I have videos already on charts, and we just did the one on some basic mosaic tips. So I've just refreshed us a little bit on charts and what to do with them here. And we'll look at how to understand Amy Christoffers' key with that chart and how to do it. And we're going to do it on my little sample here. So the bit that I've done is 4 rows that will start to give you the bottom of this flower here. Again, once you get the hang of this, then you can use her charts and her instructions to continue on. This is not an exact replica. It's just the bottom of the flower with a little bit on either side. So I've already gone over some things with charts, but just to briefly review. Charts represent the work when viewed from the right side. And by that, I mean the outside. So on this cowl that I'm working on, this is the right side. This is the pretty side. Some people also think this is pretty, but this is the wrong side. This is not how the pattern's supposed to look. It's the back side. But when you're holding and working yarn, sometimes we call the front and the back just what's facing us and not facing us. This I'm going to try to use the language of right side and wrong side as much as possible. So this is what the front of this will look like. This stuff here kind of looks like that there. So how to also understand it is you want to follow the numbers for where your rows go. The general pattern that they will take is you will go bottom to top. That is very, very important. You start at the bottom of a chart and work up. And then right side goes one direction, right to left, and wrong side goes the other direction, left to right. Now that might sound really weird, but it is indeed helping you with what your cowl, hat, shawl, whatever is going to look like underneath you as you go. When you're up at the top, what's hanging down under your needle should look like what is under you on the chart, because you have started with this row and you're working your way up as you go. And a really good pattern will have numbers to assist you. Like take a look at this one. Number 1 is over here. You want to start here and work your way across row 1. Then you want to start over here because that's where you'll be. Knitting across the right side of the row, you will start with the first stitch. We'll do this on my sample in a second, but you'll start over here and you'll knit your way across to get to over here. That is where you'll be at the end of your right side row. When you turn it around, you're going to have to start with the stitch right above it and work your way back. Now what you're holding in your hands will still feel like you're going right to left across the row you're holding, but you'll have flipped it around. So it's a little bit of a brain turn, but you're going to start where the 2 is and work your way back. Then you're going to start where the 3 is and work your way over, and start where the 4 is and work your way back. Now again, this is for working flat. The rules are a little bit different when you're working in the round, like on your hat. That will have to be a separate video if I have time to make it. So again, you want to follow the numbers for the rows in the order that they are labeled. The other thing, there's a few things more we can talk about on this chart, but the other thing I wrote down here, each square has one symbol. Each square is one stitch. And each will have a symbol or lack thereof in there. Follow the key. It's really important to find the key, and a good pattern will have a key, and it's really important to follow it. So here's the chart key for how to understand this. Again, we've got tons of boxes in here. You take them one at a time and see what needs to happen based on the symbols over here. The first thing is each square is going to have 2 things in it for a mosaic chart. It's going to have a color, and it's going to have what you do with that stitch, what color it's worked in, and what happens to it. So there's 2 things to keep track of, and we'll take a look at how that looks up here. So I've got my main color is blue. My contrast color is orange. That's the first thing to understand this chart up here. The second thing is, depending on what symbol, there are 3 different things that could happen with either the blue or the orange stitches. If there's nothing in the square, we're going to knit it if it's on the right side and purl it on the wrong side. Again, we have to keep track of what's the outside and the inside of this work. If there's a dot in it, you're going to knit it, and her chart for something worked flat is only going to talk about knitting it on the wrong side, because in her charts it only happens on the wrong side, But in case you're curious, that dot often means to purl on the right side. It looks like a purl stitch on the right side because a knit stitch, the back side of a knit stitch is a purl stitch and vice versa. S's, and Amy Christoffers used S's. Other patterns might use V's, they might use other symbols for slipping a stitch. So pay attention to your chart because for Amy Christoffers, the S means to slip a stitch. And there's different directions for the right side and the wrong side because different sides will be faced. Like when the right side is facing you, you want to slip the stitch with the yarn in back, W-Y-I-B, with yarn in back. And if you're on the wrong side, you want to slip a stitch with yarn in front. The common denominator there is the yarn needs to be carried on the wrong side of the work. And these are instructions to help you do that. So every square up here, if you take a look, has something going on in it. It either has it's blank and it's just the solid color. It has an S in it, or it has a dot in it. And what she has done is with her darker color, she has made the dots and the S's lighter, but there's still a dot or an S, even though they're not a black dot or a black S. There's only one way to interpret them according to her chart. If it's got a dot, whether it's light or dark, you're following these instructions. If it has an S, whether it's light or dark, you're following these instructions. So that's how to interpret all of this and what direction to go when you're working it. The last thing I'll say about knitting mosaic, to apply some of the things that we learned in the last video, is mosaic, you do 2 rows of each color. And often in charts, it is either the first stitch of that row will give you what color you're working. There's a slight exception with the hat. The hat has you slipping stitches right away, but you're always slipping stitches of the color you're not working. So that's something to keep in mind. If we look at this chart, the other thing I can tell about this chart just by looking at it is these first 2 rows, I'm using my contrast color because that's what I'm starting with. I am knitting with orange. That sets up these 2 rows to be knit with my contrast color. The next 2 rows are going to be worked with my main color because I'm starting by knitting with the blue. Whatever my blue ends up being in the chart, it's blue. So that's another way to process what's going on here. And so if it works out right, if I am indeed using my orange, the slip stitches are going to be blue. And if I'm using my blue, my slip stitches are going to be orange. You're always slipping the other color to make this color work illusion work in mosaic knitting. So let's see, here's a slight head trippy thing I have going on because my sample that is going to work for this, my main color is actually a light color and my contrast is a dark. So that's a little bit wonky, but I wanted to make this chart look as close to what you will see in Amy Christoffers' thing as possible. The last thing that I will mention based on her charts that can be a little hard to see, but to clarify, is a lot of her charts will have a repeat of some kind. And the repeat may be the entire chart. So it's the shawl is not going to be only 10, 11, 12 stitches across. Neither is the cowl or the hat. A lot of pattern writers will have a chart with a repeat. And the repeat, it's so you don't have to have a teeny tiny itty bitty chart that's trying to show you the entire row because sometimes that's way too long to print. How Amy Christoffers has done her chart is she has outlined it in a slightly darker black box. Some will do red or something else so it shows really clearly. It might be hard to see in here, but part of what helps you identify the repeat, she numbers the stitches along the bottom. So there's no number here. That means you do it once and now we're in the repeat. There's my chart, which is not exactly her chart, has a 10 stitch repeat. You go, and again, remember, it might feel like the numbers are going backwards, but we are reading these stitches, reading this chart, this first row from right to left. So there's 10 stitches, and then you go back to stitch 1 and repeat as many times as you can. And when you don't have 10 stitches left, according to my chart, I hopefully will only have 2 stitches left, and I will do those. Her repeats are a different number. So keep that in mind. This is for demonstration purposes only. So what I'm going to do with this sample, my contrast color, what is orange on this chart, is my multicolor. So now I'm going to follow this chart. And what I see on the chart is I'm going to knit the first. So again, I've left the yarn I just finished with, I'm leaving hanging in front. And I'm going to start knitting this back one. I'm going to knit the first stitch. And I want to keep track of my repeats. So a repeat starts here. I'm going to put a stitch marker on so I can keep track. Now I have a slip. I have an S, which means slip with yarn in back on the right side. So I'm going to slip my next stitch purlwise, which just means leave the yarn. Yarn needs to be in back. It's telling me that. I'm just slipping my stitch without twisting it. I have another knit stitch. I have a slip stitch. Now I have 3 knit stitches in a row. According to the chart, I'm going to slip, knit, slip, knit. That takes me up to stitch 10. So I'm going to slip, knit, slip, knit. That's my 10 stitch repeat. If I need to, I can count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I do indeed have 10 stitches. I'm going to put on a stitch marker. I'm going to go back to stitch 1 here, which is a slip, knit, slip, knit 3, and then slip, knit, slip, knit. I'm at the end of a repeat. Put another one of these guys on. I'll go back to stitch 1 over here, which is a slip, knit, slip, knit 3, slip, knit, slip, knit. I'm at the end of my 10 stitch repeat. I'm going to put another one of these on. I have 2 stitches left. Now I can do the end of this chart, which is a slip and a knit. So I have just worked across row 1, following the instructions the chart has given me. Now I'm going to turn it around to work the wrong side. Remember, when the yarns are on different ends, when you're working flat, it means we need to do a return row. Now the mosaic return row, if you take a look at the chart, we're going to be working, look at what's right above it. We're going to work this way, and we're going to be working our orange stitches, and we're going to be slipping the main color. That's one way to keep on track. The other is to just start over here and follow across. So these numbers are going to go in the opposite direction if we're keeping track that way. So I'm starting over here. The dot means I'm on the wrong side, so I'm going to knit. So I'm going to knit. And that S for slip is slip stitch with yarn in front on the wrong side. So I'm going to bring the yarn to the front. I'm going to slip. And I'm at my stitch marker, so I can move my stitch marker over. Now, again, reading this direction, I need to knit. So I'll move my yarn to the back, and I'm going to knit. I see a slip, slip with yarn in front. I see a knit. I see a slip, slip with yarn in front. And see, the slip stitches are my white yarn. They're not the same color as the yarn I'm holding in my hand. Now, careful, look at these. They're different. Those 3 that I'm coming across, and there are 3 of the correct color here, Those 3 don't have dots in them. I'm not knitting them. I am on the wrong side, so I'm purling them. So I just slipped and my yarn is on the front side of the work. I'm going to keep it there because I'm purling. I'm going to purl 1, 2, 3. Now I've got a slip. I've got a dot, which means knit. I've got a slip. I want to move the yarn to the front so I can slip it with the yarn on the wrong side of the work. And I'm at the end of my repeat. Here's my stitch marker. That helps me keep track to know I'm not off. If I find out I'm off over here, I've got to redo the whole thing, potentially. So now I go to the beginning of the repeat, which is this guy over here, because I'm going this way. And I've got the dot, so I knit. I have a slip with yarn in front. I have a dot, so I'm going to knit. I'm moving the yarn between stitches every single time I have to. I'm slipping with yarn in front. Now I've got those 3 stitches again. There's no dots, so I'm going to purl. I've got a slip, knit. Always move your yarn before you do things if you need to, so you don't end up with a wrap over the top. That's not used in mosaic. I have the repeat to do one more time. I'm going to knit, slip, knit. Notice that I'm knitting the yarns in the back and then I slip, so I bring the yarn to the front because I'm on the wrong side. Now I've got those 3 stitches. 1, I'm purling them because there's no dot in them and I'm on the wrong side. Slip, knit, slip. Now there's only 1 stitch left, so I'm going to do that guy right there. I'm going to knit. All right. 2 rows. It looks a little bit different. We may not see very much yet. Row 3, remember I said 2 rows with each color. It is time to use our main color, and it's calling for a blue there. My blue is my white. This is a little bit, stick with me on this. My white is my main color. It's blue on the chart. So I am going to knit 1, slip my marker because here's the edge of the repeat, and knit 3 more according to the instructions. So I'll knit, tighten up if you need to. That might feel loose, but it's because we left the other color hanging there. I'm going to knit 1, 2, 3. And according to this chart, I should be at the place where the 2 rows I just did have 3 stitches of my contrast color. And I can see that here. The chart is telling me to slip those 3. The S's in there means slip. And again, slipping with yarn in back, because that's what the instructions down here say. So slip, slip, slip. Now it looks like I knit to the marker. So here we go. You can count the stitches if you want to, if you're using markers. It can help with all of this. So I knit to my marker, I slip my marker over, I come back here to the number 1 and I do it again. It says to knit 3. I should be at the 3 stitches of the other color, and I'm going to slip them because that's what my chart says. Now the yarn floating behind the chart here, the next thing I do is I'm going to knit to the marker. Now be careful. I was telling people in my class a couple days ago, don't overthink it too much, but when you do this, try not to yank your yarn up really tight. See how that's going to squish them together? Keep your stitches nice and separated so this floats gently behind, so we don't have super puckery flowers. In mosaic knitting, you don't tend to slip more than, say, 3 stitches because we don't want those floats to be super long. In color work, we can do things because stranded color work, because we're carrying both yarns across, we can do things to lock it in place. You can't do that with mosaic knitting. So usually you're not slipping many more than 3 stitches at a time. So we will move our marker, go back to the beginning of the chart. I'm going to knit 3. Now remember, this 4 and 3, that is not the same as her charts. Her charts often have more or fewer than that. I am just showing you some of the basics here, and then you can follow her charts. So I knit 3, I'm up to the 3 of the other color, and I'm going to slip them 1, 2, 3, because that's what my instructions say. And I'm going to knit to the marker. And now I have 2 left, and my instructions there say to knit those. Now, if you didn't have these markers in here, your repeat would be once you slip those 3 to knit 4, and then start over here and knit 3 more. So you're in effect knitting 7, but I like the markers to help me keep track. So I've turned around so I can work my wrong side row. That means I'm on row 4. I'm going to start over here and go back. Now remember, a white or a black dot means a dot. So I'm knitting. I'm going to knit 2, which will take me up to my marker. I can slip my marker. Looks like I'm knitting 4 in this repeat. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm slipping 3, and they should be the other color, and that lines up with what I did. And since I'm on the wrong side, I need to slip with the yarn on the side facing me. So I'm moving the yarn to the front. 1, 2, 3. Gently bring my yarn to the back because it says I need to knit up to the marker. 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3. Move my marker, go back to the beginning of my repeat, which is right here. I'm at that top row, I'm going to knit 4. Slip 3, which is exactly what I did on the other side. I'm slipping the stitches of the other color, and I am working the stitches of the same color. Knit to the marker. I'm back to the beginning of my repeat over here. I'm going to knit 4, and they are the matching color of the yarn I'm holding in my hand. If you ever find that you are knitting on your return row, you are knitting or purling stitches of the other color, stop and see what you did, because you should be working the stitches of the same color. And again, according to the chart, move the yarn to the wrong side of the work, slip the 3 stitches of the other color, move the yarn where it needs to be so I can continue knitting. Knit to the marker. I have 1 stitch left. It's telling me to knit that 1 stitch. Now if we turn around to the right side again, it's a little more pronounced. That bottom part of the flower is a little more pronounced. Now it's time, since I just finished with my main color, to work with my contrast and follow whatever row 5 tells me to do, which is not here on my chart. But that's your little bit of crash course in how to read the charts. So we've started our journey with how to read charts. Again, my chart was not exactly the same as hers. It had some very similar elements. Her flowers are either closer together or further apart. The main set of her flowers are not as close together as these. So if you only follow my video right now, it won't be the same as her pattern. It has a lot of overlap in how to understand how to start making these flowers look pressed instead of bumpy like the rest of it. It's part of the fun, I think, of this pattern. The next few rows when you're making flowers will have instructions on how to do the wider part of the flower, and the middle part of that flower has your main color. So that's a really long expanse to go across to slip. So she's added a little anchoring stitch right in the middle. Follow her chart because that anchoring stitch is also treated differently on the wrong side than the contrast color of the petals of the flower. So follow that very carefully. Contact me or the pattern writer with questions. I may point you to the pattern writer if it's something I think she can address better. Again, I hope everyone is joining in and enjoying and trying this out. It is really, really fun. Like I said, I'm doing all four. Go big or go home, right? If you are local to Brevard, we are doing a class on the cardigan and the shawl on April, this is 2023, because this video might go on for a long time. April 15th and May 6th are the two regularly scheduled sessions, and then you can always schedule future sessions for the cardigan. If you are not local enough to come to lessons, that's part of why these videos are here, to attempt to assist. I think nothing beats one-on-one personal interaction for things, but this is the best we can do when we're far away. We don't have the capacity for virtual lessons at this time with everything else going on at the shop, but you can join we have a Facebook page. It's Sun Dragon MAL for Make Along, because we do crochet things as well. And there you can post pictures and ask advice of other members of the group. I answer when I can, but sometimes it's hard to get back to everybody. There is just about 450 people in that group at this time, which is really cool. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to this channel, which is free, giving this a thumbs up, commenting on it. All those things help us with the algorithms on YouTube. If you'd like to become a member, you can support the channel financially, or you can go to patreon.com/sundragon and support us financially over there for little bits every month. Anything you can do, whether it involves money or not, is super appreciated. So thanks for watching. And as I always like to sign off, may your crafting be filled with joy and confidence. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.